Welcome into 5 Wide Fantasy today, my top 30 running back rankings for week 4 of the fantasy football season. It is looking very bleak at the running back position right now with some injuries we've had early in the season, some players that have been let go, or some guys that are dealing with injury right now. It's pretty early recording this on Wednesday, getting this out to you on Wednesday night, so there's going to be some things that change throughout the week, and if they do, what you want to do is jump in. We're going to be live on the Stunt at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Friday. We're going to give any updates to these rankings, any players that I currently have ranked or don't have ranked, where I think they're at going into the week. So be sure to check us out there. The link to download the Stunt is going to be down below in the description. Again, I'm answering all of your fantasy football questions on players you should start, players you should sit, and can answer specific things for your lineup that you're looking to get help with. If you haven't checked out the Stunt yet and downloaded it basically takes some of your favorite social media apps, puts them all together into one place, and it's just sports. So everybody talking sports on there. We've got some exclusive content posted on there. If you go follow OwnersBox, again, the link to download the app will be down below in the description as well. I'll put it in the pinned comments. Let's get into these rankings. All right, our number one back on the week is Christian McCaffrey. Nothing too surprising here. The Cardinals are a matchup that should definitely lend itself to this rushing attack. The Cardinals right now, 24th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 30th in rushing EPA, so haven't been very good defensively against the run, and the Niners are massive favorites in this one. Will be interesting to see if Elijah Mitchell gets a little bit more involved like he was last week as well, but for the time being, McCaffrey will definitely be getting the ball a ton, especially in this first half. He should find the end zone again for, what is it? I don't know how many straight games it's been, but I saw a little betting tidbit about rolling over your money. You'd be up like $70,000, something crazy like that. So expect him to find the end zone again. Or my RB2 on the week is Kenneth Walker. Got a matchup with the Giants. The Giants have been giving up a ton of fantasy points and a ton of touchdowns to running backs. This year, they're 27th in fantasy points allowed, 28th in run defense grade from PFF. So definitely a great matchup for Walker. Volume has been good. He's actually, this season, the difference has been he's converting those inside the 5 opportunities into touchdowns. Saw him score a couple last week, or for the last couple of weeks now, I guess that would be. Charbonnet's eating into his opportunities a little bit. Don't think that's a problem, though. In this plus matchup, he's definitely going to see plenty of volume. RB3 is Tony Pollard. Pollard's got the Patriots. Honestly, Pollard's a guy right now that's pretty matchup proof. The Cowboys are going to be competitive in each and every game they play, lending itself to being able to move the ball on the ground. The Patriots, they're 5th in run defense grade, 9th in EPA, but they are 20th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think that's more because of the game plan they had for the Dolphins in week 2. Kind of let the Dolphins run the football so that they could kind of take away some of the downfield passing game. I definitely don't think it's a bad run defense by any means, but for Pollard, volume is still incredibly good. The team's not really willing to rely on any of those backup options too much, so Pollard's kind of safely a top 5 guy each and every week in my mind. 4, Derrick Henry, who definitely has been struggling. Wasn't able to put together much of a fantasy week last week. Wasn't surprising. The Browns have been excellent defensively against the run. Now gets the Bengals, a little bit more of a middle-of-the-road matchup, 13th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 21st in rushing EPA. So matchup isn't too bad here for Henry, and I do think that this is a game where the Bengals have struggled offensively. That should give the Titans some opportunities to run the football a little bit more like they didn't have last week as they were blown out by the Browns. This game could be a little bit more competitive. I believe the Titans, are at home in this game too, which should definitely help as well. Thursday night, I've got Jahmyr Gibbs as my RB5. I was just reading this morning that there is a decent chance that David Montgomery might play. So if that's the case, Montgomery will be more my RB probably 12 on the week, and then Gibbs will be somewhere in that like RB 22 to 26 range. But right now, if Montgomery isn't playing, Gibbs is definitely a top 5 running back for me. The Packers are a great matchup. 23rd in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 27th in rushing EPA. So a good matchup. And we saw last week that Gibbs was kind of given that full role. They did give touches to Donovan Knight and Craig Reynolds, but that it really didn't materialize how I thought it would. Gibbs was getting opportunities all over the field as a runner and in the receiving game. So with a really plus matchup, I definitely do like him this week if Montgomery's out. If Montgomery is in, Gibbs is more of a flex option for you, but still guy be willing to play. My RB6, Josh Jacobs. The Chargers, a run defense you want to face. Jacobs has not been able to get going here. Even in the matchup against the Steelers last week, he still struggled with efficiency. Just doesn't look like the same guy. And you find that some of these guys that have massive seasons, like won the rushing title, that volume is catching up to them. It seems to be like that for Jacobs. I'm going to give him one last chance here as my RB6 on the week. 21st in fantasy points allowed to the Chargers, 29th in run defense grade. They still got problems stopping the run, and the Raiders definitely want to get Josh Jacobs going, especially if we're not going to see Jimmy Garoppolo this week. Even more so, we'll see volume for Jacobs. 7, Brian Robinson. The Jaguars been pretty good against the run. 5th in fantasy points allowed, 6th in rushing EPA. So it's not necessarily a great matchup for Bijan. That's why I don't have him, in that top 5 right now in the week. But this is a competitive matchup. 3-point dogs, neutral site. The Falcons, regardless, Desmond Ridder has not looked good, are going to rely on their ground game. That starts with Bijan, and the receiving volume he's getting is lifting his floor as it is. 8, James Cook. James Cook getting the Dolphins. The Dolphins scheme changes, I've talked about this so far quite a bit this year, are definitely leading to this team being susceptible to giving up yards against the run, and that has been the case so far. Dead last in rushing EPA, 26th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So moving forward, this is a positive matchup for running backs, and I know Cook is not getting those inside the 5 carries we want, but he has been super efficient. I think he's averaging over 6 yards a carry. He definitely did last week against the Commanders, and I expect in this game against the Dolphins, competitive game, and the way the Dolphins play defensively, I could see a lot of check down work coming to Cook. So like him a lot this week. Definitely a guy I have in my top 12. 9, Travis Etienne. The Falcons have been really good against the run, so I know Etienne's volume has been great, but I don't love him this week. Still a top 12 guy, obviously, because of that volume, but just a little bit of temper of expectations. The Falcons have really improved. 7th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 4th in run defense grade from PFF, 5th in EPA against the run. They've been one of the top units so far on the year. So still like Etienne, the receiving volume's there. If Zay Jones misses again, that's beneficial for him too in that receiving game. And then the volume is still good for him in a matchup that should be pretty even. Neutral script should allow them to run the ball at the kind of volume they want to. 10, DeAndre Swift. I've given this Commanders team a lot of respect in the run game, and they haven't really proved me to be right. They're 29th in EPA against the run, but a middle-of-the-road defense when it comes to fantasy points allowed to running backs at 16th. DeAndre Swift has looked really good. Last week, Kenneth Gainwell ran for like 3.2 yards per carry, while Swift averaged like 8. I expect this to kind of be Swift's backfield moving forward. I'm really excited for him. Didn't expect this to be the case, but I think he's a super talented guy and is getting all the opportunity, or is not coming off the field necessarily on inside the 5 opportunities either. Him and Gainwell were kind of sharing those. So moving forward, I think Swift is going to take over as the number 1 option, considering how much better he looked last week. But I don't know. Gainwell could still be involved. They could give him the benefit of the doubt coming back from the rib injury. But I mean, running behind this offensive line, Swift looks very good. So he's a top 12 back for me moving forward. 11, Raheem Mostert. The Bills haven't been great against the run, to be honest. We saw Brian Robinson actually have some success with limited carries. We saw Breece Hall look really good in week 1. The Bills are top 10 in fantasy points allowed to running backs. They've crushed the last 2 opponents, so that definitely helps. But they're 21st in run defense grade. They're more middle of the road in EPA, so not a bad matchup for Mostert. I know a lot of people might have him even higher coming off the huge week, but the reality is he's probably going to share some opportunities with Devin. It's now Devin Achon. I saw he wants to be called Devin Achon, which will be tough to do after the entire offseason talking about him. But I do think it'll be more of a split, but Raheem Mostert has the upper hand when it comes to inside the 5 opportunities. He will, I think, be that guy more often than not. Rounding out the top 12, Zach Moss against the Rams. Moss's volume is really good. I don't know if Anthony Richardson will play. I think there's a chance that he doesn't, and that'll help Moss out from just losing any rushing opportunities or carries inside the 5. The Rams 19th in fantasy points allowed, 28th in EPA against the run. We saw Mixon find the end zone last week. Moss is, as long as he gets this volume and he's very clearly number 1, like nobody's really taking opportunities away from him, I'm going to have to respect that, and it's definitely a matchup where it is a positive one for him. Moving into the top 24, at 13, Kyren Williams. The Colts are definitely not the easiest of matchups for running backs. They're 8th in rushing EPA, 9th in run defense grade, but 18th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I do think this is a matchup here where the Rams are definitely going to still be competitive, and even if they're not, Williams is getting some really good receiving volume. Saw a ton of targets against the Bengals last week. And again, this is another situation where, much like Moss, he is their guy. There's not really anyone coming in to seed opportunities. He's getting a ton of routes run. He's getting a ton of touches. And if there's any type of positive matchup, he'll be an even better option. But right now, in more of a middle of the road, not so great matchup, but one that could be competitive, Williams will be more in this tier. 14 is Aaron Jones. Jones has been logging some limited practices so far to start the week. I think he'll be back. And quite frankly, the Packers do need him. A.J. Dillon's been brutal so far this year. So I do expect Jones to be that number 1 option when he does get back. The Lions are a team that has improved quite a bit, so that's keeping me from having Jones as like a top 12 guy. The Lions are like above average in every category here. 11th in fantasy points, 11th in EPA, 13th in run defense grade. So they are an improved unit, but I do expect Jones when he's back to be heavily relied upon on all areas of the field and potentially seeing some more opportunities inside the red zone too. I definitely think he's deserving of it. Dillon has not been good. 15, Isaiah Pacheco. Pacheco in a good matchup here with the Jets. Not necessarily a defense that you want to go against, but a game script here that should really suit him. And Pacheco's been getting a really improved role in terms of seeing more work in the receiving game, getting this larger share, obviously expected to get the larger share of rushing opportunities. I know we've seen Clyde Edwards-Helaire, especially last week, have a good volume, but that was more of a blowout. This is potential of a blowout as well, but I think early on, Pacheco will definitely get his. The Jets are definitely a defense that you want to avoid throwing the ball against, but aren't necessarily the most intimidating running the ball. And as long as the game script's positive, Pacheco should definitely be getting opportunities. 16, Javonte Williams. Williams has got the Bears this week. The Bears are not a bad run defense. The problem is they're a bad team, and the Broncos are favorites in this game by 3.5 points. points. So this could definitely lend itself to Williams seeing some decent volume. I don't think Sean Payton is too happy with Russell Wilson so far throughout this year. I think he does want to lean on the ground game when he can. Williams is that guy. And the Bears, 31st in fantasy points allowed to running back. So definitely a positive matchup for Williams. At 17, Alexander Mattison. He's a guy I would have had higher in my rankings, but I was reading last night from Kevin O'Connell, the problems and the concern he has with these fumble issues with the team. And that is basically just talking about Alexander Mattison. He has struggled hanging on to the football. And O'Connell's basically in the press conference was saying, you keep fumbling, you're going to be benched. And I'm concerned with Mattison when it comes to that not not only if he has another fumble, he'll be benched, but the concern is like Cam Akers is brought in. He didn't dress last week. If he dresses this week, it's a guy O'Connell has played with, utilized before in his own offense, so I would assume Akers is comfortable. And if he has this problem with Madison, he's not going to be shy to go to Akers early on. So otherwise, I'd have him higher, but Madison will be the starter this week, so he'll be given the opportunity to find success. The Panthers will give him that for sure. 30th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 25th in rushing EPA, so a good script here to be able to run the football as well against a Panthers team that could give the Vikings the chance to get right as well. Dameon Pierce, my RB 18. The Steelers are a positive matchup for running backs. I know it's been a struggle if you have Dameon Pierce, and I've been ranking him probably far too high considering what he's done the first 3 weeks of the season. Steelers are kind of this last chance opportunity for Pierce. 29th in fantasy points allowed, middle of the road, 18th in EPA, 17th in run defense grade. The Texans are in a spot here at home where I do expect this game to be, in one of those neutral scripts, which should help Pierce. He's still getting on the field a ton as well as a receiver, getting all these opportunities. He's got to put it together. He's got to be more efficient. The Steelers will give him the chance to do so. So I think this is kind of that last chance opportunity that I'm giving to Pierce as a confident guy to start. If I don't get it from him this week, he's going to move for me outside the top 24 and be more in that really hard to start flex type of range. 19, Rachaad White. The Saints are in a great matchup. They're 4th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, but they are 31st in rushing EPA, so they haven't been that good against the run. And the thing is with White is that the team's running the football quite a bit, a lot more than I expected this year. So White in a game that I do expect to be competitive should get 15 plus rushing opportunities, and then obviously he'll get his work in the receiving game too, because Sean Tucker, when he's come and seeded opportunities, he hasn't been very good, much better than White. White hasn't been good either, but White is their number one guy here, so I do expect to see probably 18 to 20 touches in this game, and that's going to put me firmly into RB2 category for White. 20, Ramondre Stevenson, someone coming down my rankings a fair bit. 3rd in fantasy points allowed are the Cowboys against running backs, and they're not that great otherwise. Like they're where do I have my numbers here? 15th in run defense grade, 19th in EPA. So it's not a crazy good unit. And Stevenson is the number one option for this team. Could see him see some significant receiving work if the Patriots are trailing in this game. Obviously, the Zeke revenge factor might be on the minds of some people, but Ramondre's still the number one guy. There is some struggles here, especially efficiency-wise. I do expect the opportunities to continue, but definitely something to monitor. No longer kind of a slam dunk starter week in and week out in my mind. 21, Alvin Kamara. Kamara is someone that I was trying to figure out where exactly I want to slot him this week. Hasn't been great starting Saints running backs. Kamara is a little bit more talented than I think about guys like Jamal Williams, then Condre Miller, then Tony Jones. So I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt here. The Bucs are a good run defense. The numbers don't necessarily indicate that, but they are 4th in rushing EPA, middle of the road, 17th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. Had a tough week against the Eagles this past week, but the Saints are definitely not the Eagles in the run game, and I do think the Bucs are a good run defense. Just ran into a really good rushing attack. So I'm not crazy high on Kamara this week, but a guy that I think you can still definitely start. 22, Najee Harris. I don't want to trust Harris. I do think Jalen Warren's the better player, but the Steelers are not doing that. Even last week, Harris was getting the majority of rushing opportunities. Warren's taking away that receiving game, which really hurts Harris when you look at what we've seen. Warren's taking away the receiving game, which is really hurting Harris compared to previous seasons. So in good matchups, this is probably where I'm going to have him. Bad matchups, he's not going to be a guy I want to start. Mediocre matchups, he's a flex option. And right now we got a good matchup with this Texans team, 28th in fantasy points allowed, dead last in run defense grade from PFF. So good matchup for him. I do expect the volume to be good here for a team that definitely struggling in the passing game, especially missing Deontay Johnson. So he should be relied upon pretty heavily. 23, Devon Achane against the Bills. We talked about this run defense. Don't think it's that intimidating. Definitely think he's going to get his opportunities. He looked fantastic. We still don't know if Waddle's going to clear concussion protocol. In my mind, that will help him even further if he doesn't. But you got to start him coming off that big week, especially with how capable he is of making explosive plays. He's such a fast player that can get away from defenses and score some touchdowns. And honestly, I thought Mostert would get all of the opportunities inside the 5. He got one as well. We saw him making some plays in the red zone. So I definitely think you can play him in this matchup, one that should be competitive and one that I think he'll still probably see at least 10 touches in this game. Josh Kelly, really been tough. The Vikings blitzed a ton against the Chargers, and it really didn't, the box was stacked, didn't leave a lot of rushing opportunities or holes for Kelly to be productive. Now we get a Raiders team where the Chargers are a 6-point favorite in this game. The Raiders have struggled against the run, 25th in run defense grade, 23rd in EPA, 25th in fantasy points allowed to running backs. I don't think Austin Eckler's going to be back. The high ankle sprain, it just seems like he's still a few weeks away. I'm adjusting expectations. It's a really plus matchup. I'm not going to put Kelly into the firm RB2 tier. He's now back in RB2 flex option. I think he's a guy you want to start though. I do think the Chargers will run the football effectively. They have a great offensive line to be able to do so. I don't think they want to rely on Justin Herbert throwing the ball 40 times a game like they have the last 2 weeks. This is a opportunity here for Kelly to get right. And really his role is just completely as a runner, not really much as a receiver. We've seen from the last 2 weeks, hasn't been involved much at all. So that's where I'm at with Kelly. Do think he's a good start though. Okay, we'll round out the top 30 and then get into some guys that I do have outside of my rankings. 25 is Roschon Johnson. The Broncos, huge week. They gave up to the running back position, putting them dead last in fantasy points allowed to running backs. 26th in rushing EPA. Johnson has been taking over. He had more more rushes than Khalil Herbert did. He is the guy that they haven't played more in the receiving game. I think Johnson's the better player. He's been more efficient than Khalil Herbert so far this year. So I'm comfortable playing Roschon Johnson. He's already been, I think, a top 24 running back on the season, believe it or not. So really plus matchup. I think he's the better player for this Bears team, and I do think he's going to be relied upon as such. So I do like him this week. 26 is Miles Sanders. Sanders is a guy that some of you might be surprised where I have him ranked. I do think the Vikings are a good run defense. They're 9th in fantasy points allowed to running backs, 14th in rushing EPA. They stack the box so much, it makes it really difficult to run the football. Sanders is someone that'll be involved in the receiving game as well. I do think you can still start him. He's just someone that I have more firmly in that flex territory for me, but definitely not a terrible option. Just one I'm not as confident in heading into this week. Speaking of guys I'm not confident in, Joe Mixon, the Titans, nightmare matchup for running backs, 8th in fantasy points allowed, 7th in run defense grade, 3rd in rushing EPA. Jerome Ford saved his week with catching a receiving touchdown. Mixon had just one reception last week against the Rams. He's leaving the field because he's not a capable pass blocker. They're getting Trayvon Williams out there. If I have to rely on Mixon running the ball efficiently, he's not going to be able to do that against this Titans team. So someone I'm definitely leaning more towards sitting. Jerome Ford comes in at the RB28. I do think Ford, they want him to be the number one option. They gave a ton of guys rushes against the Titans. That's because it's so difficult to run the ball against the Titans, so they wanted to probably give them a lot of looks. But I do think Ford's the number one guy. This is another tough matchup, though. The Ravens are 12th in fantasy points allowed, 7th in EPA against the run, 2nd in run defense grade. This is a really good run defense. Ford will be involved as a receiver for sure. He's definitely, in my mind, more of a flex option in a tough matchup against this Ravens defense. 29, James Conner. He narrowly stays inside my top 30. The Niners haven't showed it in fantasy points allowed. They're 15th in fantasy points allowed, but this is a really good run defense. I have tons of belief in that. Huge favorites in this game. Connor's going to need to save his week in the receiving game. I don't think he'll run the ball too efficiently. Might get some chances to score touchdowns if the Cardinals do get in the red zone, because that is the guy they do lean on. That's going to save him from being outside my top 30 this week. At 30, Zach Charbonnet. I mentioned the little increase in rushing opportunities for him. The Giants' run defense we talked about being brutal. He's someone you could potentially lean to play, and these are some of the guys that I would play, or that I would play him over. Guys I have outside my top 30. Mentioned Khalil Herbert. Brian Robinson, a really bad matchup this week against the Eagles' run defense. I'm definitely not playing. Breece Hall, still not being given that lion's share of work here for the Jets. I don't have a lot of confidence being willing to go to him, even against this Chiefs defense. Matt Breida, not going to be playing him against the Seahawks. I just don't have confidence in Matt Breida, regardless of the opponent. I don't think he's an efficient runner. He's not getting all the opportunity here. We're seeing Gary Brightwell as well. I know he scored a touchdown last week. I don't trust his talent. Cam Akers is my RB31 this week. I do think there's a chance he gets to see some opportunity. The matchup's pretty solid, but not one I'm confident starting. And then those are some of the guys that you might be asking about that I do have missing. If there's any players I didn't mention that you do want to get my thoughts on, happy to answer those down below in the comments. But as well, if you're asking about who to start or who to sit at the running back position, go off of these rankings. That is how I feel heading into this week. That might change later in the week. That's why we're going to have that live room on the Stunt on Friday, 4 to 5 p.m. Eastern. Again, the link to download the Stunt is down below. Would love to chat with you guys there. Would love to have any of you guys jump into the live room, jump in the chat, or you can actually come up on stage and talk with me as well. And we can help set your lineups for week 4 of the fantasy season. Guys, if you guys enjoyed the video, would really appreciate it if you did hit that like button. Hopefully you got some value here to help you with your lineups. Hit that subscribe button if you did. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we will see you on the next one.